Your ability at the piano, I am totally in awe, and I'd like to almost just say play. But I would like to start with the fact at Harvard, before you even graduated, you were working as a composer-arranger with Guy Lombardo?
Well, not as a composer. Let me get that straight. I went to Cleveland, where the Royal Canadians were playing at that time. That was before they went into Chicago, into the Granada Cafe, and became the big national smash that they became. They were playing in Cleveland, and I went there in the summer between my junior and senior years to work as an arranger for the band. And it was while I was there that with Carmen Lombardo, who along with his brothers became close friends of mine. With Carmen, I wrote the song to which Gus Kahn subsequently wrote the lyrics, and which became my first published song, and it was published in the fall of my senior year at Harvard, and by mid-years it was the #1 song in the country. That's what made me so objectionable.
Yes, which was?
Coquette.
Would you play a little
I was afraid
bars?
You weren't going to ask.
Of course.
Tell me why you keep fooling, little coquette, making fun of the ones who love you, breaking hearts you are ruling, little coquette, true hearts tenderly dreaming of you, and so on and so on and so on.
At that age, at Harvard, and you were very young for your class, it seemed.
I was.
How did you keep the older women away from you? Any man who would have sat down at a piano, played like that, had to have more girls falling all over him.
Well, now, wait a minute. We've got to bring some order out of the chaos of that question. First of all, you said, how did I keep the older women?
Well, a song like that.
And then you said girls running after me.
Both.
Oh, both. Well, what I tried to do, since you brought that rather intimate subject up, was draw a firm line of demarcation between the girls and the older women.
All right.
I'll tell you, I was such an emotionally imbalanced wreck during those years. Don't forget, I ended Harvard when I was 15, which even today is insanity.
Yeah.
And in those days, it was double that. And I graduated when I was 19. And I was so out of kilter that I was always madly in love. Always. I kept telling myself. And I told it to myself at such length and with such intensity that it really occupied too important a place in my scheme of things. There was always some girl for whom I was writing music and dedicating it to her, thinking that I was, you know, like Beethoven walking through the woods at Bonn, or God knows what not. And I was intermittently always in love with some older woman. It's very perceptive of you to say that. My first big mad passion was for a lady who was 12 years older than I was at the time, and remained 12 years older than I was as long as she lived, who was later a very, very important influence in my career, namely Gertrude Lawrence. And I adored her. I idolized her. And I later became her accompanist at a time in my life when I needed a job very badly. And Gertie loved me very much, too. But the thing was that she loved me differently than I loved her, because when I was 15, she was 27. And that's a big difference, you see. And to her, from that point onwards, actually I met her when I was 14 and a half, and from that point onwards until the day she died, we were close friends.
Did you work with her?
But I must make this point. For the first 2 or 3 years of the time that I knew her, I was madly in love with her. To her, I was her kid brother.
Yeah.
And that never changed.
Oh, that's tragic.
Well, I don't know. It
Yeah.
probably all for the best. But I mean, I never got to do more than give her a peck on the cheek, you know. But I had fantasies that went far beyond that, God help me.
Well, from that point, did you write any particular song for her that you say, well, that was inspired by Gertrude Lawrence?
Yes, but not quite in the way you asked that, Connie, because
Yeah.
later, when I was working for Gertrude in 1930, at that time she was still recording for what they call in England the gramophone, and singing on what they then called the wireless, and working in cabaret, as they called it, in addition to her work as a legitimate actress in the theater. And as today, special material is written for such performers. And that's how I came to write Body and Soul, because Body and Soul was one of 4 pieces of written to order for Gertrude Lawrence songs. 4 that were a job lot, you know. And when people on your side of the mic say to me, did you know you were writing a great classic? Of course not. I wrote the best song of that type, meter, tempo, mood, of which I was capable, and my objective was not to write a classic, but to have it finished by Wednesday.
Yeah.
You know. I mean,
Yesterday.
yes.
Yeah. You know, apropos of that thing of deadlines, Mortimer Adler had said that when he wrote How to Read a Book, it was strictly because he needed $1,000 to get a larger apartment and keep a wife. It's amazing what is done under the word of exigency, and that genius happens because, or success happens incidentally to the fact of what's going on. What about, after Gertrude Lawrence, Ethel Merman? You were very much connected with her success.
Very much. I don't know with her success, but very much connected with her. Ethel's success was springboarded by one of the great men of his kind, namely Al Siegel, who had been the mentor, the Svengali, the discoverer of B. Palmer, a predecessor of Ethel's. And he discovered Ethel. And he trained her and he coached her. And it was under his guidance and tutelage that she became an important performer. He, unfortunately, was taken very, very ill, just at about the time that Ethel was bursting on the scene with tuberculosis. And in those days, there were no specifics for that. You went to Denver
Or Saranac Lake.
or Saranac Lake,
Yeah.
which is where he went. And Ethel had been working in short subjects at Paramount Studios, where I was an arranger and composer, music director at that time. And I was all of 21 then. And Ethel and Al Siegel asked me if I would take over for him, which I did, and I was Ethel's accompanist for a couple of years, and loved every minute of it.
We will be back in just one moment to find out second chapter after 21. Welcome back. I'm talking with John Green, Academy Award-winning composer, arranger, and the man who's written some of the songs I've fallen in love with, and two, Body and Soul, Coquette, the music from Raintree County.
Well, that's the best thing I've ever written in the genre of the broadly speaking, entertainment field.
Would you play a few bars, passages for me?
Rain Tree?
Yes. Segueing from that, can we talk a little bit about why the snobbery of symphonic music to the music written for movies, that in many ways in our era and culture is classical, popular, and really gave people a feeling of melody and music?
And you want to know my view of why there is a disdain towards it from the areas of so-called legitimate,
Elite.
serious music.
Yes.
Because the whole nomenclature is so ridiculous. But we know what we mean. We say serious music. There's nobody more serious about his work in the world than a young rock musician, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But we know what we mean. And classical is another one.
Yes.
So, all right. I think there is some justification for it. Because if you go back to the earliest days, certainly in this country, of music for films, and we're talking about dramatic pictures now, Connie.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about musicals, because that's a whole different animal.
That's a different genre.
Right. Like, you know, the old thing about apples and oranges. Early film music, going back to the silent days, and once we got past the tinny piano,
Yeah, the Nickelodeon feel.
with the guy sitting there improvising and so on, when they got to the point that they were preparing scores for silent movies, it started out to be compilations of standard literature, if you will, works that were appropriate to hurry, to a chase, to tension, to sadness, to happiness. And they were bits and snippets and pieces of standard works, you know. Then, even in the silent days, there were some very good original scores written, but they too were derivative. The influences were very much 19th century romanticism at that time. Liszt, Wagner, composers of that kind, the bombast composers, were the ones that most greatly influenced the early writers of music for the screen. Then when sound came in, which as you know was 1929, 30, 31, and the composition of film music in this country got underway for earnest, the big influence was divided into two prongs. One was still the Wagner, Tchaikovsky, Berlioz, that kind of influence. But overlaying that was the influence of French Impressionism. And you had a combination of derivative writing from the Wagner, Tchaikovsky, etc. school. Now it was all Debussy, Dandy, Ravel, and so on. And if you stop to think that if you go back to the 20s, in the days of the Six in Paris, of whom Aaron Copland was one, and the post-impressionist field, when really creative things were being done in music by the composers away from the film industry, there was a double disdain, one I think born of envy, because very presently it began to be found out that in comparison with the starvation that the concert, opera, ballet, whatnot, so-called legit composer had to live through, in comparison to that, the film composer lived like a king because he got all this big money. So there was a legitimate aesthetic disdain that the film composer wasn't truly creative, wrote derivatively, abused the privilege of borrowing, you know. And then I think that was aided and abetted by this feeling of envy. And it got such a firm hold that it became traditional, if you will.
The put down.
The put down. In my own conducting career, which has become just about the most important phase of my life at this point, along with my composing in the extended form. But conducting is, as they say in those parts of the country, how I earn my grits, you know.
In a tuxedo.
Tails.
Tails.
They will refer to me. I mean, I go out to conduct a Beethoven or a Brahms symphony or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Hollywood's John Green. I'm not Hollywood's John Green when I do that. It's not that I'm ashamed of the fact of the wonderful years I've spent in films. I mean, I'm grateful to God for them. But when I stand on the podium of the Cleveland Orchestra, you know, or the Philadelphia Orchestra, or the Denver Symphony, or wherever it is, I am not Hollywood's John, unless I'm playing a concert of film music.
Well, I would say he really is the world's John Green, if you like music. And we will be back in 1 minute. Welcome back. Mr. Green, we left off with you, or Maestro Green, and may I call you John?
Call me John, please.
When you are conducting the Philadelphia or the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra, or the Boston Pops, what the tradition that you carry of the young musician at Harvard, the man who graduates majoring in economics, the musician from Hollywood, the musician from Broadway, what is the American musician today? What do you see the younger musicians in the symphony orchestra bringing to music in the future?
Well, whether you're talking of the players or the person on the podium, and you're talking about the young people, you are indeed talking about the future. You stop to think of such conductors as Michael Tilson Thomas, Calvin Simmons, Lawrence Foster. And to me, he's still young. My adored friend and one-time protege and all-time prodigy, Andre Previn.
Yes.
Well, you know, Andre's still young in my book. I got a wonderful little story I have to tell you about that. It's a brief one. But anyway, that's where the future is. And then what has happened within the ranks of the players in the symphony orchestras is a real infusion of younger players with a technical proficiency, in the first place, that is beyond belief. They're
Really?
coming out of the conservatories with such reading ability, with such digital ability. In other words, the facility of their playing is incredible. Now, of course, experience cannot be gained from being told something. You know, it's like that terrible joke about the guy walks up to the soda fountain and he says to the soda fellow, "Make me a chocolate soda," and the guy says, "Poof, you're a chocolate soda." Well, you can't do that with an orchestral musician. There's no substitute for sitting in the orchestra. But even our training orchestras today are, such as the debut orchestra of the Young Musicians Foundation,
Would you say that a little louder again,
The
sir?
debut orchestra of the Young Musicians Foundation of Los Angeles,
Which
California.
is what?
Well, even the training orchestras have been upgraded to a level of such effectiveness that the young people who come out of 3 or 4 years in orchestras of that caliber, and I happen to think that the YMF debut orchestra is perhaps the finest of its kind in the world.
Why is that? What
Because of our
contributes to
standards. Because of our standards in the
Who sets
foundation.
the standards?
Well, the standards were initially set by our inspired founder, Sylvia Cunin. So happens that I've been with Sylvia since before the beginning. I joined Sylvia's army, if you will, as a panelist on her Sunday afternoon television show called Debut, local here in Los Angeles, which was the forerunner of the Young Musicians Foundation. And Sylvia set those standards. And as I say, I started out with her. I've been everything in the Young Musicians Foundation, from a gopher to Sylvia Cunin's leg man, to her right-hand assistant, to a member of the board, to a vice president, to a many-term president, to chairman of the board, and now I will have you know I'm chairman emeritus.
Well,
And still
congratulations.
but not retired. I'm still
Yes.
an active trustee, a working trustee of the foundation.
what is the sound, as you would interpret it, that you're hearing from the young people in the Young Music Foundation?
In the Young Musicians Foundation? Well, in the first place, one of the early standards that Sylvia set that had been largely found fault with along the way, and often regarded as improvident and unfair to the young people because they don't get the training they should get. Sylvia made it the Young Musicians Foundation across the board. Not that there isn't older person supervision and input, but everybody's young. Our music director is one of the young musicians. We have never had a so-called faculty music director of the debut orchestra. So all of the people are young. The librarian, the orchestra manager, they're all, whatever their category is, in training. And when you look at the roster of the young conductors who have come from 4 years on that podium to their posts in the symphony world, you know that we were right. But that's where it's at, so to say. That's where you get that sound. And our standards of who gets into that orchestra are unbelievable.
Now, what composers have come out of the Young Musicians Foundation? What new pieces of music? And could you play a few bars of one?
No, that I couldn't do, because as a matter of fact, all of the pieces that have won the composition award in the years that anyone has won have been decidedly avant-garde-ish, if not actually avant-garde. There's only one composer who comes to my mind immediately, whose name is rather well known throughout the world of music today, and that's Fred Myrow, who was one of our earliest winners. I don't say that the others aren't doing well, but in the sense that we know about the performing alumni, I mean, Shirley Verrett, Misha Dictor, the various conductors whom I've mentioned, Carol Neblett, the great opera singer, Glenn Dicterow, who was the...
Can anyone apply to this? Could somebody living in Tulsa or in New York apply to the Young Musicians Foundation?
Now, you're talking about the annual competition or to be here as a regular...
Both.
Well, they would have to live here in order to benefit from the exposure to what we have to offer over the, over the long pull. But our annual competition is national. And the young people come from all over the country.
Well, it's no different than young people going to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London. I mean, you go to where the best is, and you go where the best training is.
Only one thing has to be read into this record in the interest of honesty and complete clarity. the Young Musicians Foundation is not a school. It is supplementary
I see.
and complementary. In other words, within the debut orchestra, we have young people from UCLA, from USC, from various conservatories of music, who in addition to their academic work, come to the Young Musicians Foundation for the added coloration of their musical points of view, their abilities, their garnering of experience, and so on. One of the great things that we have done in the Young Musicians Foundation, which has put us in competition with any number of parents, is that we accept into our young people's fold young musicians of extraordinary gifts in whom we see the potential for a viable, workable career as professionals, not necessarily as soloists. And you know, the parents want their kids to be Asher Heifetz. That's only one thing to be, it's not everything.
Mr. Green, may I ask you what you have been reading lately?
Scores, I regret to say.
Scores are books.
Well, yeah, but reading what you talk, not necessarily that kind of book, was one of the great pleasures of my life. But the pressures of my conducting career, on top of everything else that I keep trying to do, are such that if I don't keep up with repertoire, I'm in big trouble. So my reading is devoted to scores.
And what have you been reading lately? If you'd like to know more about music in America, music in Hollywood, music in the movies, In Back of Me, the American musical, Rodgers and Hart, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. My guest has been John Green, the man who made most of those things possible. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next week. Hello, I'm Connie Martinson, and with me today is a man about whom the books are written when they say American music, John Green. Thank you for letting me join you again, Mr. Green.
I'm delighted to have you join me again, and again, and again.
And in that case, I am not going to ask too many questions except, will you play some of the music from your era on Broadway in this segment?
Yes, I'll be glad to.
Thank you.
Are you saying, in effect, give us a medley of your hits? Oh, with the S.
Yes. You Came to Me out of nowhere. I think I cried over that in a few places. When the letter didn't come in the mail, Little Coquette, I danced to. And before I say another word, I'd rather hear you play.
Okay. Well, shall I just repeat a smidgen of Coquette from the other show?
Absolutely.
Tell me why you keep fooling, little coquette, making fun of the ones who love you, and so on. You know, one of my unfavorite things in the whole world is, and then I wrote. You know, that's become so corny, but that's what you asked me to do.
That's what I said.
Well, now I said yesterday, or whenever the show was on, that Gus Kahn wrote those lyrics. This next one, and most of my big ones, the lyrics were written by Edward Heyman. You came to me from out of nowhere. You took my heart and found it free. this next one, the lyrics were written by Eddie Heyman and Billy Rose. I want to be loved with inspiration. I want to be loved starting tonight instead of merely holding conversation. Hold me tight. Und so weiter, meaning and so forth. And then another one with Eddie, which the public has kept around for a lot of years, God bless him. I cover the waterfront. I'm watching the sea. Will the one I love be coming back to me? I cover the waterfront in search of my love, and I'm covered by the starless sky above. Then another one with Eddie. You're mine, you belong to me, you, I will never flee. You're here with me to stay. As you can see, I was a kind of a sentimental slob.
I feel America should be eating their heart out to be me at this moment. Oh.
Then with that great poet of song, Paul Francis Webster, they say in Raintree County there's a tree bright with blossoms of gold, but you will find the rain tree's a state of the mind or a dream to unfold. And then with E.Y. Harburg, the man who wrote those glorious lyrics for Harold Arlen's Over the Rainbow, with me he wrote, let's see, I better put it in another key, which is more suited to my non-voice. Ask the sky above and ask the earth below why I'm so in love and why I love you so. Couldn't tell you though I tried, dear, just why, dear, I'm yours. And you know what, Connie?
Yes, John.
I think I'd like to save one that I flatter myself most people would like to hear me play till a little later on.
Yes.
Now, really
The maestro.
embrace the piano with it, and that'll be body and soul for later.
Who and whatever made you this elegant and this marvelous? Were your parents musicians?
Well, both my mother and father were well-trained, very, very competent pianists avocationally. My mother was a homemaker, which I prefer to say to a housewife. And my father was a banker and builder. But they both were well-trained pianists, and they both played beautifully. And I grew up hearing the two of them at one keyboard playing all the classic symphonies forehand, you know, the great oblong books that had the piano primo up here and piano secondo down here. And they did that all the time. So I was brought up in an atmosphere of that kind of music, and each of them playing alone, chamber music in our home all the time. So.
Your background, then, as opposed to most people thinking, is really classical, and it's out of that foundation that this sort of magnificent sounds flow.
Well, I don't know that the sounds are magnificent, but I would definitely say that the ultimate background was decidedly classical. Of course, the background in my life that has counted for something in the outside world, along with the classical part of it, stems from such people as George Gershwin, who really brought me up as a professional musician. I met George when I idolized him anyway. I was actually in Aeolian Hall, I may say in a 50-cent seat at the top of the balcony on February 12th, 1924, for the world premiere performance of the Rhapsody in Blue. And
we will be back in 1 minute to discuss how An American in Paris on screen owes a great debt to Mr. Green. Welcome back. I'm talking with Mr. John Green about George Gershwin. An American in Paris on screen owed a great deal to you, Mr. Green. Your role as an arranger, how did you work with the original symphonic part of it?
Well, I'd like to make a slight modification of where the owing goes musically on American in Paris. That film had co-music directors. The co was Saul Chaplin, and Saul and I collaborated on many films in that capacity. I was the sole conductor of the music on the picture, but believe it or not, when two musicians have enormous respect for one another and think similarly without being yes men each for the other, a collaboration is possible. And in films, when those two music men are also expert filmmakers, forgive the...
There's no need to be modest.
Yeah. Then it works doubly well. And there was a third person who was our right-hand bower, who was the late and infinitely great orchestrator Conrad Salinger. So actually, Saul Chaplin and I won the Academy Award together. I think today, with the way the Academy's been modified, that would have been a tripartite award instead of a dual award. I think Connie would have been on there too, Conrad Salinger.
Yes.
But you were asking about taking this symphonic poem, which George Gershwin wrote on commission from Walter Damrosch, and was then called the New York Symphony, and wrote it for the concert hall. Well, what was the problem in using it within the spectrum and framework of that film? The number one problem, of course, was the fact that the team that devised that film, and of course that's got to be one of the greatest teams that ever worked together in the history of theatrical entertainment. Arthur Freed as the commanding general, who was unique to work with and for. He was the producer. Then Gene Kelly as the combined male star and choreographer, Vincent Minnelli as the director of the film, Alan J. Lerner as the librettist, Ira Gershwin as the coach and advisor about his brothers and his songs.
That really is
unbelievable.
Film as a perfection in that one film. The collaborative efforts that make a diamond of a film.
Well, I want to tell you that team worked, I'll make an athletic comparison, the way the greatest of Knute Rockne's teams ever worked together. I recall emphasized discussions. I don't recall an angry word among the team.
Using the melodic theme of...
Okay, well that's the walking theme, so-called. The problem was that the film ended with first time ever in a commercial box office picture, which it was. This was not an art house picture.
Yeah.
No. An 18-and-a-half-minute ballet. The board of directors of MGM, the Lowe's Incorporated, which is our parent company, they thought we were out of our minds. You know, it was all that Arthur and I and Gene and the others at the top echelon of the team could do to sell them on giving us the money to make this ballet. But then, the answer to your question is, here we had to take this concert piece and adapt it to the choreographic needs laid down by Gene Kelly. And also to the mise en scène, to the direction and to the visual part of it, which, as you may remember, that whole scene, the settings were the Impressionist paintings.
Utrillos and, yeah.
Utrillo, Cézanne, Manet, Toulouse-Lautrec. You know,
It's phenomenal that it could have happened and that it still exists, that it wasn't like a show on Broadway, that it's over.
It's there.
Yeah.
I got to be allowed to say one thing that answers so many of the things that you and I have talked about in preparation for this on-camera session of ours. The recording of the ballet music from An American in Paris was an enormous seller, that record. And it was released as a record as the ballet music from An American in Paris.
Yeah.
I have flatly refused through the years since 1951 to play that version of An American in Paris in the concert hall. Because when I'm on the podium in front of a symphony orchestra in a concert hall, I speak for George Gershwin, not for MGM, not for Gene Kelly, not for me. I interpret George Gershwin. He didn't write that for the concert hall. He wrote An American in Paris for the concert hall. And I've been resolute about that.
When you then were arranging the music, how did you take that walking music and arrange it from John Green's point of view as an arranger?
Well, let's say, how did Connie and Saul and I adapt it to Gene Kelly's requirements? Gene is as musical a non-musician as you've ever met in your life. He has enormous musicality. Believe it or not, there are some dancers who are not that musical. They're rhythmically very sound. But Gene is so sensitive to the values of music, to all the philosophical musical values.
Yeah.
So we had great discussions about, well, Gene, you really shouldn't do this because it is so destructive of the original texture and the original, well, I don't ever want to do that, said Gene, you know. But for example, there are extensions. You remember that in the course of the ballet you saw the Parisian firemen coming?
Yes.
Well, that was.
Could you show me on the piano?
No, enough with
All
the
right.
piano.
Oh, all right.
I'm enjoying
All right,
what
talking.
I'm saying.
Yes.
Well, that's a fragment in the Gershwin original. But Gene extended it, you see, for the purposes of his choreography.
It became visual, too.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we had to extend it. We did that kind of thing, do you see? And in reorchestrating it, I'm going to let a little bit of a cat out of the bag, and maybe it's not all that tactful, because I adored George. I idolized him as an authentic genius and as a great friend. He was not, at the time that he wrote this piece, the most felicitous orchestrator in the world. And I had to be very mindful of cost. So where we orchestrated, sheer reorchestrated Gershwin, it was to make sure that it would go down in one take once we read it. And there were no problems of balance. George wrote too thickly in the orchestra. He had lacked, at that point, orchestral courage. He didn't have the orchestral courage to write a line for violas and leave it there. He doubled it in the bassoons and doubled it in the cello and doubled it in the low clarinets, you know? Well, that kind of thing we culled out so that the mixer could set the parts and not have to play around with them.
And I have the courage to interrupt to say we'll be back in 1 minute. Welcome back. I'm Connie Martinson with the maestro John Green, who has, at my deep request, is going to play Body and Soul.
I think you probably should say that the reason you want me to play it is because I wrote it.
Wrote it, and I don't think there's a doubt in anyone's mind, and I don't want to miss a moment of hearing it.
You know, I'm not that egotistical. I don't take it for granted that they know that I wrote it.
They will know. Bravo, bravo.
How do we get that percussion section?
I think that was Louis B. Mira, Arthur Freed coming back.
No, between the percussion from the big book
Yes.
and the fly,
You
who
had,
was trying to get into
Yes.
the act.
yes.
That's doing it the hard way.
But it may have been doing it the hard way, but it was certainly magnificent. Are you playing that with any symphony orchestras this year?
Oh, I just did an extended treatment like that with the LA Philharmonic at the Hollywood Bowl just last month.
Why is this not considered a symphony, Mr. Green? This is really the basis of what would have been a melodic theme for...
Oh, now look, you've asked for a course in music form in 30 seconds, and as I said before we rolled the cameras, I can't say good morning briefly. A symphony is a very precise kind of musical form, not necessarily anchored to sonata form in the first movement or to the classical symphonic form, but a symphony consists of a statement, development, recapitulation within the movements, a variety of tempi, and something that is actually symphonic in its very essence and its very architectural concept. This is a 32-bar song. It's not a symphony.
But there are themes, and I'm sure people watching don't know, but I will tell them that you have just returned from Harvard University, where you were you were in the
I was
seat
an
of
artist in residence in the Learning from Performers
learning
program.
from performers. Were questions similar to what I've just asked of you, why a theme such as this had not been evolved into more of a symphonic form then?
Well, themes, when you say such as this, let's say that you're talking categorically and not qualitatively, because I won't discuss it on a qualitative basis. That's for other people to do. But, you know, there are themes from symphonies that have been turned into songs. So if that's if that
Tonight
can
We
happen,
Love
it could-
Tchaikovsky
well, it
didn't
could
get
go
the
other
royalty,
way.
yes.
Or you know, from the Tchaikovsky Fifth Symphony is one you're playing.
Moon Love,
Moon Love, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And oh, there've been so many of those, you know.
We talk a little bit about being a performer in residence at Harvard. The input that you gave to a younger generation coming up, the musician's obligation to music by handing it to another generation.
Well, the whole essence of that program at Harvard, which is a very special kind of program, is a sharing experience. Sharing is never sharing unless it implicitly includes a two-way street. So for an artist in residence to be successful in that program, he or she has to be prepared for two-way sharing with the students. And it's not just a cliche, you know, or a bon mot when I say I learned as much from them or more than they could possibly have learned from me. I shared with them in many areas by virtue of the fact that I've always been such an unmitigated show-off, you know, and done so many things. I gave lectures in the relation of music to film. I gave lectures in the art of songwriting. I gave what was called a colloquium, an extended composition, in the music department, using my new symphony as the guinea pig. And when I say the guinea pig, when I tell you, they gave me a rough afternoon. Those not only the young people, but even members of the faculty. But it was a long afternoon. It was a 4-hour afternoon that we spent discussing my symphony, how I came to write it, why is it like it is, etc., etc.
This is Mine Eyes Have Seen.
Mine Eyes Have Seen, yeah.
Would you play just a little of it for us as the show is coming to a close?
Yes, I will play you what is one of my favorite themes that I ever wrote, or at least the first part of it, because it's a long theme. And I want to make one point. This is a highly tonal, melodic, unabashedly melodic theme that, like life, is surrounded by all kinds of other influences. Our life isn't all sugar candy. Neither is my symphony. There are parts of it that are enormously dissonant and atonal, and some parts of it that are actually organized 12-tone rows. But this, which comes right before the coda, is a song for the orchestra. Oh, I'm going to do that again. Did you hear that?
Yeah,
Did you hear that
clinker.
clam?
I heard anybody can have a clinker.
And so on. That's a
Thank
cry.
you.
That's one of these, and
Thank
it's
you.
all in the string, very, very simply orchestrated, and it comes out of total bedlam, and this resolution comes.
Thank you so very much. If you all wanted to say thank you, I don't blame you. It's been a marvelous experience. We'll see you next week, and thank you again.
Oh, thank you, Connie.